I am Natalie Brooks, 22 years old, and I have just officially held in my hands a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Michigan after 4 years of relentless studying, working, and supporting myself. Unlike many of my classmates who had their parents covering expenses, I had been working part-time at an auto repair shop and a coffee shop since I was 18. On freezing Michigan mornings, I would crawl into an oil-stained coverall, standing for hours beside steaming engines. And on late nights, I would be behind the coffee counter serving lattes, smiling at customers even when my legs felt like they could give out. All of it was for one single goal: to buy a 2014 Chevrolet Camaro, my pride, proof of my independence, and the vehicle that could take me anywhere I wanted to go. Yet, on the very morning of my graduation, the day I should have only been thinking about joy, I received a text from my father. I opened my phone, hoping for a congratulatory message, but instead saw a short line. "Sold your car. Sophie needs money for a down payment on a new apartment in New York before she starts school. Be grateful you still live in this house." My heart sank. The Camaro he had borrowed that morning for an errand was not just a car. It was the result of thousands of hours of work and sacrifice, and now it was taken away without even asking. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about losing something material, it was a blow straight to the core of everything I had worked so hard to build. Have you ever experienced being betrayed by your own family on what should have been the happiest day of your life? If you have, share your story and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. My family was never well off. My father, Thomas, worked as a supervisor at an auto parts manufacturing plant, earning enough to get by but never with much left over. My mother, Linda, was a part-time medical secretary at a dental clinic. And then there was Sophie, my 8-year-old younger sister, the golden child of the family. To my parents, Sophie was not just the youngest, she was their biggest investment project. They always said she had the potential to shine, that as long as the family focused all resources on her, she would achieve extraordinary success. That might sound noble, but in reality, it meant I became the silent foundation, taking on all the extra work and responsibility so Sophie could float freely in her own world. Since I was 13, the household chore list had automatically fallen into my hands. In the mornings, I woke up early to prepare breakfast for the whole family, making sure Sophie had perfectly toasted bread and a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice before she walked out the door. After school, I was the first to rush home, toss my backpack onto a chair, and start cooking dinner. Laundry was my responsibility too, not just my own clothes but Sophie's as well, and if any of her items needed to be hand-washed or treated for special stains, I had to handle them carefully to keep the fabric intact. When Sophie started taking ballet, theater, and photography classes, I became her unwilling personal driver. Many days, I sat in the car for hours waiting for her, doing my homework under the dim yellow light of the parking lot, because Sophie couldn't possibly walk home by herself, especially at night. While I learned how to save every penny, buying clothes from thrift stores and mending worn spots myself, Sophie never had to think about money. Every back-to-school season, our parents took her shopping for designer shoes, handbags, and dresses. Every summer, she was sent to expensive East Coast summer camps that claimed to unlock potential through art, acting, and fashion courses. I remember one time my mother said sending me to an in-state science camp was too extravagant and unnecessary. Yet she didn't hesitate to spend triple that amount for Sophie to take photography lessons with a well-known photographer. My parents never hid their favoritism. My mother often told me, "You have to understand, Sophie needs investment to shine, even though we're not well off. You're more independent, you know how to take care of yourself, so we don't need to support you as much." My father would echo the same thing. "You're stronger, sweetheart. You'll find a way to manage on your own." At first, I heard those words as a kind of compliment. I thought they believed in my abilities, that they saw I could stand on my own feet. I swallowed every moment of unfairness, telling myself that if I just worked harder, behaved better, and proved myself more, one day they would acknowledge me and give me the pride I had always longed for. But the truth was, that day never came. When I earned a full scholarship to the University of Michigan, my mother simply smiled and said, "Good, that means we don't have to worry about you much." Then immediately told the relatives about Sophie being invited to model for a small fashion brand. When I won a state-level science research award, my father barely reacted before asking if I could drive Sophie to her acting class because my mother was busy. Even on the occasions when I truly hoped for praise, my joy was swallowed by stories about Sophie and her potential. There were moments when I felt almost invisible in my own family. One time, while I was working a late shift at the coffee shop, my mother texted me to pick up a cake and balloons on my way home to celebrate Sophie winning a school photography contest. No one asked how many hours I had worked that day, whether I was tired, or if I even wanted to attend the party. I simply complied, because that was what a good sister was supposed to do. And when I earned an A+ on a difficult engineering project, I treated myself to a small cake and ate it alone in my room, because the whole family was busy taking Sophie to a friend's birthday party. The justification of Sophie needs investment and Natalie doesn't need much support became the perfect shield for my parents to rationalize every unfair decision. They could sell my belongings without asking, demand that I work extra hours so Sophie could buy a prom dress, or rearrange my work schedule just to take Sophie out. And if I protested, the answer was always, "We're family, and family helps each other." The only problem was that help always flowed in one direction from me to them, never the other way around. Looking back, I realize I had been living in a loop where my worth was measured by what I could provide. I had spent my youth laying the foundation for Sophie, clinging to the fragile hope that one day my parents would acknowledge those efforts. But the longer I waited, the clearer it became that in their eyes, I was merely a resource for Sophie to shine, and that position was never going to change. Then, when the Camaro, the only symbol of freedom I had saved for years to earn, was sold without a word of warning, I knew every boundary had been crossed. After the graduation ceremony, I drove home in a classmate's borrowed car, a road I had once traveled freely in my own Camaro, now feeling heavier than ever. Walking through the door, I saw my father sitting on the couch, eyes glued to the television, while my mother stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables as if nothing significant had happened. There were no congratulations, no questions about the ceremony. Gathering all my courage, I asked directly, "Why did you sell my car without saying a word?" My father only shrugged. "Sophie needed the money right away. Your car is still family property." My mother added, "You can carpool with coworkers or take public transportation. It's not like you need the car to survive." I tried to explain that the Camaro wasn't just a vehicle, but the result of thousands of hours of work, a symbol of the freedom I had earned for myself. But my father just repeated the same line I'd heard my whole life. "Family helping each other is normal." And my mother fell back on her old refrain. "Sophie is at a stage where she needs investment to shine. You're independent now, you don't need as much as she does." As I listened, it felt like I was right back in the middle of hundreds of old conversations where every argument I made was erased by one word. Sophie. I pressed my lips together, swallowed my anger, and let it pass like I always had before, but this time, something inside me cracked in a way that could never be repaired. The next morning, as I was getting ready to leave the house, my mother walked into my room holding a piece of paper and spoke in a firm voice. "Transfer $7,000 for Sophie's tuition before Friday. Family helping each other is a given." There it was again, that familiar line. I stood still for a few seconds, as if I needed to make sure I had heard her correctly. $7,000, it was more than what I had saved over the years, money I had intended to use for graduate school and to cover emergency expenses. I looked her straight in the eye and said just one word, "Number." She froze for a moment, then frowned. "What did you just say?" I repeated it, this time even clearer. "I'm not giving the money." Not long after, my father appeared in the doorway, his voice already raised to a shout. "Stop being so selfish. Your sister needs help and you're refusing? Family doesn't act like that." I tried to stay calm. "I've already done more than enough, and I have nothing left to give." But that only made him angrier. "If you won't help, then get out of this house. We don't keep people who only think about themselves." Before I could even react, I received a text from Sophie dripping with sarcasm. "You live off mom and dad and still act stingy. You really are petty." I stared at the words, feeling something inside me shatter completely. They called me someone who lived off them, when for years I had contributed to groceries, paid the utility bills, done all the housework, driven Sophie to every activity, and sacrificed my time and energy without pay so she could have an easier life. But to them, none of that meant anything if I dared to say no, even once. I looked around my room, the place that held the few belongings that were truly mine, and realized that what they meant as a threat, I saw as an opportunity. There was no fear or hesitation anymore, only a quiet determination forming in my chest. If this was what they wanted, I would go. And once I left, I would never return to being the good sister or the unconditional resource again. I didn't wait for the next morning. That very night, while the rest of the family was still engrossed in the television downstairs, I quietly closed my bedroom door, pulled my suitcase from under the bed, and began packing. No one noticed, no one imagined I would actually leave, because they still believed I would give in like I always had. But they didn't know I had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Every item I put into the suitcase had been carefully chosen. A few essential outfits, important books, some personal items, and a small wooden box containing old photographs and a handful of keepsakes I didn't want them to touch. The rest, the things of real value, had been moved out earlier. Since I was 17, I had secretly opened a savings account at a small bank in town where my parents never did business. I deposited all my cafe tips, most of my wages from the auto shop, and any income I didn't have to report to my family. That account was my safety net, known only to me and the bank staff. On top of that, I had rented a small storage unit about 15 minutes drive from the house, where I kept my valuable possessions. The mechanics' tools I had bought myself, a few electronics, and anything I didn't want reallocated to Sophie. Important documents, degrees, scholarship records, and my laptop had already been moved to Rachel's house, my best friend since high school, over a month ago. Rachel knew my situation inside and out, and she had quietly helped me prepare. We had an unspoken agreement. Whenever I was ready to leave, there would always be a place for me in her living room. 6 months ago, I had taken the most important step, filing for emancipation, the legal recognition by the court that I was an adult and no longer a dependent of my parents. That decision wasn't impulsive. It was the result of years of realizing that their help always came with strings attached and control. I had been paying for my own car insurance, phone bill, food, and transportation since I was 18. I worked 2 part-time jobs alongside my studies, maintained a steady income, and regularly deposited money into my savings account. I even contributed more financially to the household than Sophie, who had never earned a single dollar for herself. The emancipation process moved faster than I expected. The pro bono attorney at my university guided me in gathering the documents: bank statements proving my income, the lease for my storage unit, insurance bills, and even receipts showing I had paid for groceries for the entire family. I also prepared a statement about my living situation, that I had alternative housing and clear plans for both school and work. When I presented everything to the court, the judge, a woman in her 60s with a seasoned, knowing gaze, asked me only a few questions before nodding. She said, "You've been living like an adult for a long time. Now we're just making it official." 3 weeks later, I received the formal decree. I stored the original and notarized copies in a thick envelope, locked inside the wooden box at my storage unit, waiting for the day I might need them. And today, that day had come. Once my suitcase was nearly full, I opened the drawer, took out the envelope containing the emancipation certificate, along with another folder I had carefully compiled over the past year, a detailed record of every time I contributed money or had belongings taken. Photos and videos of me doing household chores, bank statements, and receipts for groceries. All of it would be left on the dining table, so they would understand I wasn't leaving out of impulse, but because I had thought this through and because they had pushed me to my limit. Around 10 p.m., I rolled my suitcase out of my room, stepping quietly down the hallway. The television murmured in the background, Sophie's laughter spilling out as she chatted on the phone. No one looked up. I placed the thick folder on the table, along with a handwritten note. I am no longer dependent of this family. This is the truth. Then I opened the door, stepped outside, and didn't look back. Rachel was waiting for me at the corner in her silver hatchback. When I placed the suitcase in the trunk and sat in the passenger seat, she just looked at me once and asked, "You sure?" I took a deep breath and nodded. Absolutely. As the car rolled away from the street I had known for years, I felt an invisible weight in my chest lift. For the first time in years, I was no longer bound by the four walls of a house where I had never truly been considered part of the family. And I knew, from that moment, I would never go back to my old life. Sitting in the car with my friend, heading toward a new beginning, I still thought about the old stories and the feeling I had when I placed that folder on the dining table, the oak table that had seen countless family dinners I had prepared, yet rarely allowed me to sit in an atmosphere that felt genuinely warm. The yellow light spilled over the deep brown cover of the folder, the paper edges slightly curled from months of careful arrangement. I had deliberately set it in the exact center of the table, where I knew my mother would see it first thing when she walked into the kitchen in the morning, and my father wouldn't be able to miss it when he poured his first cup of coffee. Inside, I had divided everything into clearly labeled sections, numbered and neatly clipped in plastic covers. The first section was the original emancipation certificate, the legal document stamped in red by the court, declaring that I was officially no longer a dependent of the Brooks family. I wanted them to see, in a way that was undeniable, that every legal right of control they once had over me had ended 6 months ago. Next to the original, I placed a notarized copy so that if they wanted to keep one, they could, but the original would remain safe with me. The second section was the savings account statement, the figure of over $18,000 printed clearly on the last page. I had printed the full transaction history from the past 2 years, highlighting in yellow every regular deposit from my paychecks at the auto shop and coffee shop. Alongside that, I marked in red every withdrawal made for the family. Money for groceries when my mother said, "Things are tight this month." Money to fix the plumbing when my father said, "Wait until next month." Money for Sophie's school supplies because she needed it urgently for a project. These withdrawals alone totaled more than $10,000, all of it unreimbursed. The third section was the full-ride scholarship letter from the University of Michigan for my graduate program, complete with a monthly living stipend. I included a printed copy of the confirmation email from the scholarship office, clearly stating that it was a comprehensive support package covering tuition, books, and part of my housing costs. This meant that, contrary to the narrative they like to tell relatives that Natalie is struggling to pay for school, I had more than enough resources to support myself and absolutely no need to drain anything further from the family. The fourth section was a stack of receipts and invoices I had kept meticulously. Grocery runs, home repairs, utility bills I had covered when my parents said, "We'll transfer it back in a few days," but never did. I had annotated each receipt with the date, the reason for the expense, who had asked for it, and whether it was ever reimbursed. The total for the past 2 years exceeded $10,000, undeniable proof that I had done more to keep this household running than anyone else. The final section was a collection of photos and videos moments I had secretly captured over the past year and a half. There were photos of me scrubbing the kitchen floor at 11 p.m. after Sophie threw a party and went to bed. A video of me hand-washing a white dress Sophie needed for the next day while she sat laughing on the phone with a friend. Pictures of me carrying paint cans, standing on a ladder to repaint the living room walls over spring break, while the whole family watched movies downstairs. I wanted them to see, with their own eyes, the stark contrast in how we lived, one person doing and giving, the other taking and enjoying. On the folder cover, I didn't put a name, only a small yellow sticky note with the words, "The truth doesn't need explanation, only eyes to see." I didn't expect them to read it all. I knew my parents, the chances were high they would get angry before they even reached the second page. But at the very least, I had left everything transparent, not through stories, but through evidence. This was the only way I could force them to confront what they had done, instead of hiding behind justifications about family love or investing in Sophie's future. The next morning, before sunlight had fully spilled into the Brooks family kitchen, I imagined the scene of them coming downstairs and finding the folder sitting squarely in the middle of the dining table. And just as I had predicted, things began to explode. A little after 7, I got a text from Rachel. "Your house is getting loud." Sophie's screaming like she wants the whole neighborhood to hear. As it turned out, Rachel had a friend who lived directly across from my house, and news was spreading faster than I expected. Sophie was crying and shrieking, her high-pitched voice carrying as she slammed something hard against the table. The first thing the neighbors heard was, "She's ruined my life. She left and dropped this here just to humiliate the whole family." I could almost picture her flushed face and tear-filled eyes, not from regret, but from rage at seeing her princess status challenged. My mother, Linda, after flipping through a few pages of the folder and ignoring the clear numbers and photos, went straight to her most familiar response, crafting a new story to control the narrative. She started calling relatives one after another, the aunt in Ohio, the uncle in Florida, the grandmother in California, all hearing the same carefully edited script. In her version, I had stolen money from the family, fabricated documents to slander Sophie, and abandoned my parents at the moment they needed me most. In that story, I wasn't the daughter who had carried the household chores and paid for countless expenses over the years. I was the selfish traitor, poisoned by bad friends. My father, Thomas, chose a different route. He didn't waste time on outrage, he acted immediately. He called my university, trying to reach the financial aid office under the pretense of wanting to verify my daughter's scholarship and financial situation. When asked if he was my legal guardian, he replied, "I'm her father, of course." But when the school checked the records and saw the emancipation decree, the answer came back. "I'm sorry, we can't provide that information. She is no longer your dependent." That door slammed shut right in his face, and I'm certain he felt the sting of losing the control he had always believed he would keep forever. It didn't stop there. My father also called my workplace at the auto repair shop. I knew this because later, my manager Dave left me a voicemail, his tone a mix of irritation and amusement. "Your dad called, said there was a family financial emergency, and demanded to know your work schedule and salary information. I told him straight that I couldn't share that, and if it was important, he should contact you directly." He hung up right away. I almost laughed when I heard that message, partly because I had anticipated it, and partly because of how powerless he must have felt when every familiar avenue was suddenly closed off. And where was I in the middle of all that chaos? Sitting on Rachel's sofa, wrapped in a soft fleece blanket, hands cupping a mug of hot coffee. Rachel kept glancing at me from time to time, as if waiting to see how I would react, but I only shrugged. Not because I didn't care, but because I had grown too familiar with these kinds of explosions. In the past, whenever I went against my family's wishes, the anger and accusations would drag on for days, pulling me into endless arguments where I tried to explain, tried to prove I wasn't wrong. But this time, I chose silence. I didn't answer a single call or message from them. My phone buzzed nonstop, missed calls from the house number, long texts from my mother full of exclamation points, messages from Sophie written entirely in caps, and short, sharp notes from my father. "Call back now." I left everything on silent, filed into a separate folder, a way of closing the door in my mind against those familiar but toxic sounds. Rachel asked me if I felt relieved. I nodded. Because unlike before, I knew they couldn't touch me anymore, not legally, not financially, and most importantly, not mentally. I had left that house both physically and emotionally. And while I knew the storm was far from over, I also knew I would never again be the anchor they tied their lives to. I sat at Rachel's dining table, laptop open, the original folder still intact beside me. After a night of letting them digest the truth, I knew it was time to strike back. Silence could protect me, but to truly break the cycle, I had to make sure the truth was seen in places they couldn't control. I poured another cup of coffee, took a deep breath, and began. The first target was my grandparents in California. In my memory, they had always been kind, sending me a small birthday card each year, even though we rarely saw each other. My parents had always told them, Sophie is the sweet, smart one, and Natalie is stubborn and difficult, and I had never contradicted them, thinking I didn't need to justify myself. But this time, I sent an email with the entire scanned folder attached. The emancipation papers, the savings account statements, the scholarship letter, and photos and videos of me sweeping floors, cooking meals, driving Sophie around while she went to the spa or shopping. I wrote a short note, without complaining, simply summarizing the truth. You deserve to know what has really been happening. I'm not sending this to ask for money or pity, only to make sure the story isn't distorted. The second target was Sophie's boyfriend's parents. This was a strategic move. I knew they had once given Sophie a large sum of money to pursue her dreams in New York, because I had overheard her bragging about it at dinner. I printed the file, placed it in an envelope, and sent it by express mail. In the letter, I wrote only, "If you wish to continue your support, please do so with full information." This is a part of the story you may not have heard. No sarcasm, no attacks, just facts, leaving them to draw their own conclusions. The third target was a few close family friends, the ones my parents often used as comparisons, saying things like, "Look at their kids, so successful and grateful to their parents." I sent them the file via Facebook message with a short note, "In case you hear a different version from my parents." This was a group of people who were excellent at spreading news, and I knew it would take only one of them to read it for the truth to be whispered everywhere. The results came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Rachel was chopping vegetables in the kitchen when she looked at me, smiling with a mix of surprise and satisfaction. "You've stirred the hornet's nest." My grandparents called me, their tone stern but warm. "We'll talk more in detail, Natalie. Thank you for trusting us with this." I could hear the disappointment in their voices, not directed at me, but at the way their son had behaved. Sophie's boyfriend's parents responded with a polite but cool email. "Thank you for sharing this information. We will be reconsidering our financial support." I knew that for a family that valued honor and transparency as much as they did, Sophie's behavior would leave a crack that could not easily be repaired. And then came the domino effect in New York. An old friend messaged me. "Sophie just got called a spoiled princess right in the middle of coffee with her group in Manhattan. Someone brought up the video you sent, and the whole table went silent." The poor, misunderstood victim persona Sophie had so carefully crafted was beginning to crumble. In a small social circle where young people survive on image and connections, a bad reputation spreads faster than wildfire. My parents reacted fiercely. My mother flooded my phone with messages that swung from pleading to blaming to outright threats. "You've destroyed your sister's future. You'll regret this. How could you treat your own blood this way?" My father sent only 3 words, over and over, "Enough, Natalie." But I knew that enough in his mouth wasn't an ending, it was a demand that I return to my old place, silent, burden-bearing, and compliant. I watched my phone buzzing constantly on the table, then turned it face down. I didn't need to respond. For the first time in years, I felt that the power to control the narrative was in my hands. I hadn't done anything except bring the truth into the light, and it was that truth, not me, that had them in a panic. I said goodbye to Rachel and moved into my new studio apartment on a cool Saturday morning in early September. The place was on the 3rd floor of a classic red brick building, just a 10-minute walk from my graduate school and about a 15-minute drive from the garage where I worked part-time. The space was only about 300 square feet, just enough for a double bed by the window, a small desk, and a wooden bookshelf I'd found at a thrift store. But to me, it felt like a palace. I set down the last suitcase and let out a long breath, realizing for the first time in my life I truly had a space that was mine alone. No one knocking on my door to tell me to make tea or do laundry. No one handing me a to-do list as if I were the household maid. I stood by the window, looking out at the small street lined with trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn yellow and fall, and felt a strange, deep sense of relief. Thanks to the full scholarship with a living stipend, combined with my part-time job at the garage, I could fully support myself. The garage was a small shop run by Marco, an Italian owner with a straightforward but kind personality who often brought cannoli for the crew on Fridays. I handled car washes and basic repair assistance, nothing glamorous, but I liked the feeling of earning every dollar with my own hands. The smell of motor oil and the clink of wrenches sometimes felt far more comforting than the tense family dinners I had once endured. After 3 weeks on the job, I saved enough to buy a 2008 Toyota Corolla from a regular garage customer. It wasn't flashy, not the kind of car Sophie would ever flaunt on Instagram, but the engine ran well and the driver's seat had a few small tears I planned to stitch up myself. The day I drove it back to my apartment, I felt both free and grown up. That car wasn't just transportation, it was proof that I could stand completely on my own. In the evenings, I often turned on the warm yellow lamp in the corner, opened my laptop to work on assignments or read a book. Outside, the city stayed busy, but within these four walls, I had a peace I'd never known before. No more hearing my mother call, "Natalie, bring this for me." No more Sophie yelling because she couldn't find her favorite sweater and blaming me. No more feeling indebted just for eating dinner in my own home. One weekend night, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the rain. I realized I was sleeping better now, no longer waking in the middle of the night from nightmares of being scolded or abandoned. I no longer wore the mask of the dutiful child just to stay out of trouble. I started spending time drawing again, learning guitar and joining a vintage car club with a few friends from the garage. Each small activity felt like a new piece in the puzzle of rebuilding myself. I knew the journey of healing was still long. But in this little apartment, with the job I chose, the car I bought myself, and the freedom I had fought for, I had already taken my first step steady and sure. 8 months after I walked out of that house, my life had turned to a completely new chapter. I had just finished my first year of graduate school with outstanding grades, gotten a raise from Marco at the garage, and landed a paid research project from the university. While everything in my world was settling into place, news about my old family still found its way to me through mutual acquaintances. My father, Thomas, had lost his supervisor job at the factory after a round of layoffs. My mother, Linda, had started working evening shifts at a private clinic to make ends meet, but the pay was much lower than before. And Sophie, the sister once draped in the title of Golden Child, was now working part-time at a clothing store in the mall. I heard she complained endlessly about having to stand for 8 hours, still convinced this was just a temporary phase before people recognized her worth. One Saturday afternoon in early May, I was wiping down the Corolla outside the garage when the doorbell to my apartment rang. I opened it and froze. Standing there were all three of them. My father wore a wrinkled old button-down, my mother had reading glasses perched on her nose but dark circles under her eyes, and Sophie still tried to keep her air of superiority. But the once polished curls were now overgrown and messy, and on her feet were faded sneakers. My father spoke first, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk, Natalie." I stayed silent, stepping back toward the kitchen to let them in. The air in my small apartment grew heavy, nothing like the peaceful atmosphere I'd gotten used to. My mother glanced around, lips pressed as though she were evaluating everything she saw. Sophie crossed her arms, avoiding my gaze. My father got straight to the point. "We're in trouble. The bank's about to take the house. Your mother doesn't make enough to keep up with payments, and Sophie's only just started working part-time. We need $20,000. Just this once, and we'll pay you back." I looked at Sophie. She avoided my eyes, but still added, "You have money. I know you've saved a lot. Family helping each other is just common sense." I took a slow, deep breath. In an instant, memories rushed back, being ordered around like staff, the meals I cooked that were met only with criticism, and that text on my graduation morning. "Sold your car." I had once wanted nothing more than their recognition, had thought that if I tried just a little harder, I'd finally be valued. But today, I understood I no longer stood in that place. I sat up straight, set my teacup on the table, and looked each of them in the eye. I don't hate you, Mom, Dad, or you, Sophie. But I'm not stepping back into the same cycle. Helping each other is good when it comes from love and respect. But family can't be an excuse for someone to take advantage. My father frowned. What are you talking about? This is your chance to prove you're still part of this family. I shook my head lightly. Being part of a family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself without limits. When I needed you the most, none of you were there. Now I have my own life and I'm going to protect it. How nay? My mother cut in, her voice sharp. You're ungrateful. All those years we fed you and put you through school. I interrupted, my tone still calm. Fed me and put me through school? I've been working since I was 18 to pay for my car, my insurance, and to contribute to the bills. I still have the receipts. Don't forget, I left with nothing but my own 2 hands, just to protect myself from being taken advantage of. And all the Sophie let out a short, mocking laugh, but her eyes couldn't hide their unease. I continued, this time more firmly. I will not give you $20,000. I hope you find another way to solve your problems, and when you walk out of here, don't come knocking again if the only reason is money. The room sank into silence. My father stared at me, perhaps searching for some soft spot to exploit, but this time I didn't lower my gaze. My mother pressed her lips together and looked away. Sophie rolled her eyes, then abruptly stood, muttering something about cold-hearted before pulling the door open. My father and mother followed, leaving behind the faint scent of her old perfume. When the door closed, I stood still for a moment, listening to the sound of their footsteps fading down the hall. Outside, the late-day sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting long golden stripes across the hardwood floor. I felt something close to relief. Not because they had left, but because I had held my boundaries. A year after that final confrontation with my family, my life had changed so much that even I sometimes felt astonished. The Corolla still sat snugly in the garage of my apartment complex, but my bank account now held more savings than I'd ever dreamed of having when I lived at home. I had just completed my 2nd year of graduate school, kept my full scholarship, and been hired as a full-time technician at Marco's garage. That June, I received an email from the Brooklyn Community Council. They were inviting me to their annual recognition ceremony, honoring young individuals who had made notable contributions to the community. I had been nominated for founding a nonprofit project that connected mechanical engineering students with job and internship opportunities at local garages, factories, and machine shops. The ceremony took place in a small but warm theater. On stage, the golden light spilled across the rows of seats, where I spotted familiar faces from workshops, classes, and even the free repair days we'd hosted for neighborhood residents. Marco sat in the front row, next to Rachel, the one who had sheltered me through those first months after I left home. When my name was called, the sound of applause filled the entire hall. I walked up to the stage, accepting the certificate and bouquet from the council president. In front of me were hundreds of eyes, and in that moment, I knew I needed to say something not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever lived in the shadow of favoritism and control. I held the microphone, took a deep breath, and began slowly. For a long time, I believed my worth only existed when it was recognized by those closest to me. I worked myself to exhaustion, sacrificed everything, just to be seen by them. But I eventually realized that day would never come. And I know many people here have felt, or are feeling, the same way. I glanced around and saw a few people nodding quietly. You do not need the validation of those who don't believe in you. Give yourself the chance to break free from control and to find your true worth. When you dare to step out, you don't just reclaim your life, you create a better version of yourself, one that is respected and loved in the way you deserve. I paused, letting the words settle in the air. Healing isn't going back to the ones who hurt you, hoping they will change. Healing is building a new life, one where you wake up each day knowing you are living for yourself, not for anyone's approval. The applause came again, louder and longer this time. I smiled, bowed, and left the stage with a mix of relief and pride. That evening, I treated myself to a drive around the city. When my tires rolled over the steel of the Brooklyn Bridge, the fiery orange-red sunset washed over the water below. I rolled the windows down, letting the cool wind sweep away the weight of the past. Streetlights flickered on, stretching into warm golden lines. My hand rested on the wheel, my lips curling into a peaceful smile. No more orders barked at me, no more commanding texts, no more feeling indebted just to exist in someone else's space. There was only me, a new Natalie, free and complete. In that moment, I knew I had been right to close the old door and open a brighter one. This life is mine, and I will live it my way. And if you're watching this and see a part of your own story in mine, I want you to know something. You don't have to endure mistreatment just to be called family. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to keep a place in the hearts of those who only take and never give back. You deserve a life where you are respected and loved, not for what you do for others, but simply for being you. And if today you're not ready to leave, that's okay, but start preparing. Step by step, dollar by dollar, plan by plan. One day, you'll walk away with your head held high, knowing you saved yourself. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next family story.